It was a Tuesday afternoon in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Families were grabbing lunch. Teenagers were hanging out between stores. Shoppers were moving through the corridors of the Mall of Louisiana, one of the largest and most visited shopping centers in the entire state. It was the kind of ordinary afternoon that nobody thinks twice about. The kind where the biggest decision you make is whether to get a pretzel or a slice of pizza from the food court. Then at exactly 1:22 p.m., everything changed. Gunshots rang out inside the food court, shattering the mundane rhythm of an average weekday afternoon. What followed was one of the most chaotic, terrifying, and heartbreaking scenes Baton Rouge had witnessed in recent memory. A mass shooting that left 10 people injured, sent the entire mall into a panicked lockdown, and drew a law enforcement response so massive it was visible from the sky. Witnesses described the scene as instant pandemonium. One moment, people were sitting at food court tables, eating, scrolling through their phones, having conversations. The next, the sound of gunfire exploded through the air, and the entire food court erupted into chaos. People screamed, knocked over chairs, dove under tables, and sprinted toward exits in every direction. Parents grabbed their children. Shoppers abandoned their bags mid-stride. What investigators would later piece together through hours of surveillance footage review was this. Two separate groups of people had gotten into a heated argument inside the food court. That argument escalated fast, and both groups opened fire on each other right there in the middle of a crowded shopping mall. It was not a random act of terror. It was not a lone gunman. It was a targeted confrontation between two groups, playing out in one of the worst possible places it could, surrounded by dozens of innocent bystanders who had nothing to do with whatever conflict had brought these two groups to this moment. As bullets flew, innocent people caught rounds they were never meant to receive. Men, women, and children who had simply come to the mall to spend a Tuesday afternoon suddenly found themselves in the middle of a gunfight. The 911 calls flooded in almost simultaneously. Within minutes, Baton Rouge erupted into a full-scale emergency response, the likes of which the city rarely sees. The Baton Rouge Police Department led the charge, but they were far from alone. The sheriff's office mobilized. St. George Police responded. The Louisiana State Police came, and then, underlining just how serious the situation was considered in those first chaotic minutes, the FBI showed up too. Helicopters were cutting through the sky above the mall. Drones were deployed over the surrounding area. Officers on foot fanned out through the mall's corridors, checking every store, every back room, every corner where a frightened shopper might have locked themselves in and hidden. Canals near the property were searched. The entire perimeter surrounding the mall was locked down. Nobody in, nobody out. The parking lot, still packed with the cars of shoppers who had fled on foot or been ushered out in a hurry, became a sprawling crime scene and staging ground all at once. From the outside looking in, the scene was almost incomprehensible. Police vehicles stretched as far as the eye could see, lights flashing, tactical units in full gear. A law enforcement presence that reporters on the scene described as one of the most extensive they had ever witnessed in person. EMS teams moved fast. Victims were stabilized at the scene and transported to local area hospitals within minutes of the first units arriving. Not all of them waited for an ambulance, though. Some of the injured were rushed to hospitals in private vehicles by people who were simply trying to get their loved ones help as fast as possible. 10 victims in total were confirmed hospitalized. At least 2 of them were in critical condition, going through surgery. The full extent of the injuries, the ages of the victims, the exact number of weapons used. Investigators were still working through all of it in those first frantic hours. And then, as the dust began to settle, came the confirmation that changed everything. One person had not survived. One person who had walked into the Mall of Louisiana that Tuesday afternoon had not walked back out. The death toll stood at 1, with 9 others fighting through various degrees of injury in hospital beds across Baton Rouge. When law enforcement officials stepped in front of cameras to address the public, the weight of what had just happened was written on every face. The police chief spoke first, laying out the timeline with the kind of measured precision you only develop from years of training for moments exactly like this one. Shots fired at 1:22 p.m. Massive response. Scene secured. No active shooter ongoing. Surveillance video reviewed. 2 groups, 1 argument, 1 catastrophic exchange of gunfire. He was careful with his words. He didn't want to release the number of people involved in the two groups because the investigation was still in its earliest stages. He didn't yet know how many weapons had been used. He didn't know the exact ages of the victims. What he did know, and what he wanted the community to hear clearly, was that this did not appear to be a random attack. This was targeted. This was personal between two specific groups of people. The innocent victims around them were, in the most tragic sense of the phrase, simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. He also had a direct message for anyone in the community who might know something. Cell phones, he said, are everywhere. If you were at that mall, if you captured anything on video, if you know anything at all, reach out. The tip line was put out publicly. 344, stop. Anonymous. No questions asked about your identity. Just information, because every second matters when suspects are still out there. Then the mayor stepped to the microphone, and the tone shifted. He was not measured. He was not diplomatic. He was furious in the way that only someone who genuinely loves their city can be when that city is wounded. To the thugs who did this, we're going to catch you. We're not going to have this in Baton Rouge. It's not going to happen. He praised the law enforcement response without hesitation, calling it proof of just how prepared and capable Baton Rouge's public safety infrastructure truly is. But then came a harder question from the press, one that nobody in that room was really ready to answer comfortably. Shreveport had just made national headlines with a major mass shooting of its own. Now Baton Rouge. Back to back. People were scared. What do you say to them? The mayor's answer was honest in a way that felt almost jarring. He acknowledged that people have every right to be scared. He said that sometimes, no matter how many resources you throw at a problem, law enforcement, social programs, community outreach, if someone decides they are going to do something like this, they are going to do it. Sometimes all you can do is respond. It was a sobering admission, stripped of political spin, from a man standing in front of a mall where people had just been shot over a food court argument. While the press conference was unfolding outside, the situation inside the mall was still far from resolved. Hundreds of shoppers remained trapped inside, having followed active shooter protocols, locking themselves in stores, hiding in back rooms, crouching in fitting rooms and behind counters. Officers were going store by store, corridor by corridor, making sure everyone was safe before beginning the enormous logistical task of evacuating the entire building. People were being escorted out through the J.C. Penney entrance, one of the designated exit points during the controlled evacuation. The parking lot was still full of cars belonging to people who had fled on foot, people who were still inside, people who had left in ambulances. It was the physical residue of a mass panic. Hundreds of vehicles sitting silent in the afternoon sun while their owners were somewhere inside, waiting to be told it was safe to breathe again. The lockdown extended well beyond the mall's walls. Getting in and out of the surrounding area was nearly impossible. Reporters arriving on scene described navigating through layers of law enforcement checkpoints just to reach their staging areas near the building's perimeter. The interstate exits were backed up. The roads around the mall were choked with emergency vehicles. For miles in every direction, Baton Rouge had effectively stopped moving. The investigation was still very much in its early stages when officials spoke to the press. Suspects had not yet been publicly identified. The exact nature of the conflict between the two groups remained unclear. Whether it was a long-running dispute or something that ignited spontaneously in the moment, nobody was saying yet. But surveillance footage was being reviewed frame by frame, shell casings were being cataloged at the crime scene, and investigators were making it clear that every lead would be run down until those responsible were in custody. The broader question, the one the mayor grappled with at that press conference and the one that lingers long after the cameras pack up and go home, is one that Baton Rouge, and frankly much of America, has been sitting with for years. How do you stop something like this? How do you prevent a confrontation between two groups from becoming a massacre of bystanders in a food court? There are no easy answers. There never are. What there is in the immediate aftermath is a city processing shock and grief. 10 families with loved ones in hospital beds. One family planning a funeral for someone who left for the mall that morning and never came back. A community of shoppers and workers and bystanders carrying the invisible weight of what they witnessed, heard, or fled from that afternoon. and a law enforcement apparatus working around the clock to make sure that whoever pulled those triggers in the Mall of Louisiana faces the full consequence of what they did. Baton Rouge had been through hard days before. It would get through this one too. But the scars from a Tuesday afternoon in the food court would not heal quickly. Not for the victims, not for the witnesses, and not for a city still trying to make sense of the violence that found them in the most ordinary of places.